The chandeliers in my uncle's country club estate glowed so brightly, they made the row of luxury cars lined up outside look like props in someone else's life, certainly not mine. I walked in wearing the simplest dress I owned, still feeling the imaginary smear of pizza grease on my wrist from the delivery shift I'd just finished. I slipped the warm box into the catering kitchen, but Uncle Ethan had already spotted me. He lifted his crystal glass high enough for the whole room to hear and boomed, "Still delivering pizzas, Ava? Some people just never grow up." A polite wave of laughter rolled through the guests, thin, embarrassed, and satisfied in the way only rich people smiling at misfortune can be. I just smiled back and said, "I came straight from work." That was when Liam, my cousin Chloe's fiancé, walked in mid-phone call, stopped cold, and stared at me like he'd seen a ghost trace my outline. He lowered his voice, typed my full name into Google, and as the blue light washed over his face, the color drained out of it. The room quieted as he whispered, barely audible, You didn't tell them who you are." And to explain why the man marrying my cousin went pale just from Googling my name, we have to go back to another dining room, years before tonight. My name is Ava Nguyen. I'm 32, Asian American, and I live in a small one-bedroom apartment wedged above a laundromat in the city. On the outside, nothing about me looks extraordinary. I work odd hours, I keep to myself, and several nights a week. I throw on a red insulated jacket and deliver pizza for a small local chain that pays just enough to cover rent, utilities, and the occasional grocery run. My family doesn't know anything beyond that. To them, I am the niece who took a gap year that never ended, the girl who lost her way in college, the cousin who drifted from one part-time job to another, barista, cashier, delivery driver, before getting stuck in what they consider the lowest rung. Food delivery. That's the story they tell themselves, and honestly, it's the only one they ever cared to look for. My Uncle Ethan certainly made sure of that. He is my father's younger brother, though no one meeting them would ever guess. Where my father built a quiet life working maintenance at a hospital, Ethan built an empire, or at least he crafted the illusion of one. He owns a chain of mid-tier restaurants scattered across the state, a handful of commercial buildings, and a meticulously curated public image of being self-made. He likes to talk about starting with nothing but ambition and a credit card. A story he repeats so often that even the pauses between his sentences sound rehearsed. At family dinners, he positions himself as the patriarch despite not being the oldest, giving unsolicited business advice, judging career choices, and handing out life lessons no one asked for. What he never mentions is how many of his early bills were paid by my grandparents, or how many of his opportunities were carved out by stepping on the backs of the very people who worked for him. To the outside world, he's charismatic, charming, even. But within the family, he thrives on hierarchy. He casts himself as the model, Chloe as the heir, and everyone else as background characters orbiting his spotlight. And me? I was always the cautionary tale. Chloe, his only daughter, has been the princess of the family since the moment she took her first breath. The golden child. The chosen one. She grew up in private schools with language tutors and horseback lessons and international summer programs that cost more than my family's annual income at the time. She studied abroad in Italy, took a gap year to find herself in Paris, and returned home with a glamorous job title in her father's company that no one ever quite understood. Every major family gathering, birthdays, holidays, anniversaries featured a slideshow of Chloe's achievements. Ballet recitals, debate trophies, graduation photos, pictures of her at the beach in Santorini or posing in front of the Eiffel Tower with perfect lighting. Her engagement party was the latest jewel in Ethan's crown, a polished, extravagant event hosted not for love, but for the display of status. The guest list was a calculated mix of investors, local business owners, old money neighbors from the gated community, and relatives ranked in order of usefulness. Somehow, I always found myself right at the bottom of that list. Over the years, I had perfected the art of blending into the background at family gatherings. If there was a long table with 20 seats, I would be placed somewhere near the ficus plant, or by the door leading to the kitchen, or at a folding chair that was added last minute. I never complained. Complaining only fed their narrative that I was ungrateful, sensitive, or jealous of Chloe. And so I stayed quiet. I listened. I observed. I absorbed every offhand comment like a paper towel soaking up grease. "Ava, sweetheart, maybe one day you'll find something stable," a distant aunt would say, as if I were a toddler still learning to walk instead of a grown woman holding 3 part-time jobs to stay afloat. "You know, not everyone is meant for college," another uncle would offer, nodding sympathetically while eating a steak that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "At least Chloe will never have to deliver pizzas at 30. Ethan once said with a flourish of his fork, loud enough for the entire table to hear. The family laughed. Chloe giggled into her napkin and offered a half-hearted, "Dad," in that performative, faux humble tone she used whenever she wanted to seem gracious. My parents sat stiffly, their eyes fixed on their plates. They didn't defend me, they rarely did. Partly because they feared confrontation, partly because they believed Ethan's success gave him the right to speak the way he did. And me? I swallowed the pain like I always did. I learned to stretch my smile into something polite, non-threatening, and numb. It wasn't that I lacked ambition, it wasn't that I didn't dream. But dreams were fragile things in a family where only certain people were allowed to have them. I became the family's example of what not to be, a reminder that success was genetic, that talent ran through certain bloodlines and skipped others. No one bothered to ask what I did after hours, what I studied at night, or where I disappeared to on weekends. No one cared to look past the insulated pizza bag slung over my shoulder. It was easier for them if I stayed small. Easier to keep their hierarchy intact. But what they didn't know, what they never imagined, was that the girl, sitting quietly at the end of the table, the one they mocked and dismissed, had been building something. Watching, learning, planning, that every delivery run, every hour spent navigating the city, every late-night shift, and every spreadsheet I scribbled on the back of receipts was part of something bigger they could not see. Still, at that time, in their eyes, I was just Ava, the niece who never became anything. The one they didn't have to respect. And so the story continued exactly the way they wanted it to, until the night it didn't. My earliest memories smell like tomato sauce and scorched mozzarella. Before Ethan became Ethan the restaurateur, before the magazine features and the ribbon cuttings and the speeches about being self-made, he owned a single pizzeria tucked between a pawn shop and a dry cleaner on the edge of town. My parents worked there, my dad in the kitchen, my mom managing the register, both of them convinced they were helping build something that would one day include them. Ethan told them often, "When this place takes off, we'll all rise together." My parents believed him. They always did. I spent countless afternoons sitting at the corner of the counter with a notebook, drawing little maps of the restaurant and making charts I didn't know were charts. I'd count how many customers walked in each hour, track which nights were the busiest, and try to figure out why Tuesdays were weirdly slow unless it was raining. Numbers made sense to me in a way people didn't. I was maybe 9 or 10 the first time Dad pointed at my scribbles and joked, "We've got ourselves a little analyst." Ethan overheard and laughed, ruffling my hair like I was a dog. "Let her mop a floor first," he said. "That's how real business starts." It's door 9. Even then, I felt something tighten in my chest. Something that whispered, "He's not joking." Not really. By the time I was 16, I knew exactly how much my parents hoped Ethan would eventually share ownership or offer them a stake. They weren't greedy, they just wanted to feel secure after giving him years of loyalty and sweat. And Ethan played into it beautifully. He'd pat my father's back and say, "You're like family, man. When we expand, you'll expand with us." Then he'd buy himself a new truck and tell my dad there wasn't yet enough for raises. But that summer, my 16th summer, something changed for me. I got accepted into a competitive business and tech summer program at a nearby university. Not a full scholarship, but partial, enough that my parents proudly scraped together the rest. It felt like the first door that had ever opened directly for me, not through Ethan, not through family expectations. A door I'd earned with the strength of my brain, not my ability to carry trays or fold pizza boxes. The orientation session was scheduled on a Saturday morning. I remember waking up early, carefully picking out a collared shirt and black pants, imagining myself in classrooms with students who talked about ideas instead of schedules. Dad was so excited he made breakfast twice, forgetting he'd already cooked. Mom hugged me too long, whispering, "Show them who you are, sweetheart." It slash plows. But when we got to the pizzeria to grab my last paycheck before heading to campus, Ethan was standing by the counter surrounded by customers. He looked at me, looked at my clothes, then burst into a laugh loud enough to make the nearest tables turn. "Where's the fire, Ava? Job interview at Pizza Hut?" I'm going to my summer program orientation," I said, trying to sound confident. He stared at me like I had told him I planned to walk to the moon. "Summer program? For what?" "Business and tech." And right there in front of 3 customers, 2 cooks, a delivery driver, and my parents, he shook his head theatrically and said, "Business school? Please. You'll learn more about business mopping these floors than sitting in some overpriced classroom." My face went hot. The cooks laughed. My parents didn't. They stood frozen, mortified. Before I could respond, Ethan grabbed one of the red delivery shirts from the back counter, tossed it to me, and said, "Here. Chloe's at cheer practice and we're short-staffed. You can take the lunch run. I'll give you a free slice after." He said it like he was doing me a favor. Like I should be grateful. Dad started to protest. "Ethan, today's important, she." But Ethan waved a hand. "Orientation? She'll survive missing one day. Besides, you all want to help me expand, right?" Family steps up. And just like that, the decision was made. Not by me, not by my parents. By him. I remember walking outside into the summer heat carrying 3 pizza boxes, the red shirt swallowing my body, my eyes stinging. Mom called after me, saying she would drive me to the program afterward, but by the time I finished the run, the session was over. And somehow, everyone pretended it wasn't a big deal. Ethan kept saying, "Plenty of summers for fancy programs," and Chloe, who had spent hers in Europe, laughed and said, "Yeah, you didn't miss much." But I had. Something irreversible. The first time Ethan publicly humiliated me wasn't actually that Saturday. But it was the first one that tore through something inside me. The kind of wound you don't notice bleeding until years later. The second time carved the shape of that wound. It happened a few weeks afterward. Chloe had just returned from a 2-month trip across Europe, her Instagram full of outfits and gelato photos and scenic beaches. Ethan threw a little gathering at the pizzeria to welcome his princess home. I was helping fold pizza boxes in the back when Ethan called me forward to help bring food to the tables. When I stepped outside, rain was pouring. I was carrying 2 boxes to the car to deliver when Chloe twirled in the doorway, showing off some accessorized scarf she bought in Milan. Ethan beamed at her like she was floating. Someone asked about her trip, and she launched into a story about a yacht in Greece. Right as I passed them, hair plastered to my cheeks, Ethan gestured at me with a laugh and said to the group, "She's just helping out. Not everyone is cut out for real success, you know?" Laughter. Again. Like it was the most harmless thing in the world. Like I wasn't standing right there. Like I wasn't a human being. I held the boxes tighter and kept walking. Each step felt heavier than the rain. That was the moment the pattern became undeniable. The hierarchy, the humiliation, the unspoken rule that Ethan could step on me whenever he pleased, and everyone else would follow his lead. That's why, all these years later, his voice echoing across the engagement party, "Still delivering pizzas, Ava?" wasn't just a jab. It was the reopening of every wound he had ever carved into me. It was the past pressing its full weight against the present. But what he never realized, not then and not now, was that humiliation, for some people, becomes fuel. And while he thought he was keeping me small, he was teaching me how to see the cracks in people like him, cracks I would one day use to break his entire illusion apart. Leaving Ethan's pizzeria wasn't a dramatic exit. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no cinematic declaration of independence. It was quieter than that, quieter and heavier. One morning, after a shift where Ethan barked at my father for slicing tomatoes too unevenly, then complained that my mother's register math lacked discipline, I simply walked out into the parking lot, sat in my dented Honda for 10 minutes, and realized I couldn't breathe. Not because the air was thin, but because the future felt suffocating. I saw myself at 35, 40, 50 still being ordered around by a man who needed to shrink others to feel tall. So I took the first job I could find that allowed me to make money without being anyone's puppet: delivery work. I signed up for every app: DoorDash, Uber Eats, Grubhub, Postmates, a few local services. If the app existed in our city, my name was in its system. I became a ghost on wheels, sliding through traffic, weaving between neighborhoods, learning the city block by block. During the day, I delivered pizzas for a mom and pop chain that didn't ask questions and paid on time. At night, after parking my car outside my apartment, I'd prop open my laptop and dive into community college classes. Data analytics, basic Python, logistics management. My bedroom became a classroom, my desk a command center, my life split between survival and possibility. My parents didn't understand. They saw me walking away from Ethan's stable ecosystem as a reckless decision. "He may be difficult," my mom said one night while folding laundry, "but family is family, and he has opportunities you might need." My dad added, carefully, "Maybe you should ask him for a job at one of the new restaurants. Just until you figure things out." But I had already figured one thing out with absolute clarity. "I'm not dying on someone else's kitchen line," I said. It was the first time I'd ever said something like that to them. My voice didn't waver. They stared at me like I'd spoken a language they didn't recognize. Delivery work, at first, was just a means to survive. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, it became my education. Being a driver meant seeing the city's veins from the inside. I knew which streets were clogged at 6 p.m., which alleyways shaved 5 minutes off a route, which apartment buildings were black holes of elevator breakdowns. I learned which restaurants packed orders fastest, which always delayed, which ones overwhelmed their drivers with unrealistic wait times. And most importantly, I saw the inefficiencies everywhere. Drivers idled outside restaurants for 20 minutes because the system assigned pickups without checking real prep times. Routes overlapped unnecessarily, two drivers heading to the same street from opposite sides of town. Restaurants paid ridiculous fees: 30%, sometimes 40% to apps that brought them business, but bled their margins dry. Customers complained about cold food, drivers complained about low pay. Restaurants complained about losing profit. Everyone suffered. The system worked for no one except the middleman. I started keeping notes, at first on stray receipts, later in organized spreadsheets. I tracked hotspots of demand, dead zones, typical wait times, choke points, neighborhoods with high tip likelihood, patterns in driver assignment. It became an obsession. I built a massive Excel file, tabs upon tabs, formulas stacked on formulas, rows color-coded for efficiency, heat maps showing where routes could be combined to reduce mileage. I didn't know it yet, but I was building the skeleton of something powerful. Some nights, after my classes ended, I would stay up until 4 in the morning adjusting models, simulating delivery flows, calculating theoretical cost savings. My hair smelled like garlic butter and car deodorizer, my eyes burned, my fingers cramped from typing, but I felt alive. More alive than I ever had under Ethan's fluorescent kitchen lights. But balancing everything came with its own kind of heartbreak. My parents worried constantly. They kept emphasizing the word stability like it was a kind of holy scripture. "Tech isn't real work," Dad said once. "Logistics? That sounds complicated. Apps come and go." Mom added, "If you go back to work for your uncle, at least you'll have a steady paycheck." They said it out of love, I knew that. But love built on fear can feel like a cage. Every time they urged me to just go back, something inside me hardened. Not out of rebellion but out of necessity. I had spent my childhood watching my parents give Ethan everything: their loyalty, their skills, their dignity. And I watched Ethan repay them with crumbs. If I walked back into his empire, I knew exactly who I would become: the girl who missed her orientation because her uncle needed a delivery run. The girl whose ambitions were a punchline. No. Never again. One night, sitting at my desk with my laptop open to a map of the city, I realized something fundamental. The problem wasn't that drivers were inefficient, it was that the system forced them to be. The major delivery apps didn't care about route optimization. They cared about volume. But small businesses, local pizzerias, family restaurants, takeout shops needed efficiency. They needed control. They needed liberation from the apps that drained them. That was the night the idea hit me with the force of a freight train. A platform that optimized delivery routes and logistics for small and mid-level restaurants, something that let them coordinate drivers, maximize efficiency, and reduce their dependence on wasteful third-party apps. A system that used data, not brute force, to streamline everything. A system drivers could rely on. A system restaurants could afford. A system I already had half the blueprint for in my spreadsheets. I opened a fresh document and typed 2 words at the top. Route Nova. Nova, new star. Route, the path forward. It sounded dramatic, maybe even silly, but in that moment it felt like naming a promise. The next step felt impossible and inevitable all at once, turning my Excel obsession into an actual product. I didn't know coding well enough, not yet. So I doubled down on my classes. I spent nights learning Python, SQL, basic machine learning. I took every free online course I could find, worked through textbooks borrowed from the library, joined forums where strangers answered my questions at 3 in the morning. I built a rough prototype, ugly, buggy, barely functional, but it worked well enough to give me hope. In the daylight hours, I kept delivering pizzas. I kept studying restaurants from the inside, the chaos, the patterns, the blind spots. I paid attention in ways I never had before. Because now every shift, every order, every route was fuel. Research, insight, data, pieces of a puzzle only I seemed to notice. And while Ethan believed he had kept me small, trapped in the world of deliveries, he had unknowingly placed me in the perfect position to understand the very system that would one day dismantle his own. Route Nova didn't exist yet. Not really. Not in the way it eventually would. But the spark had been lit. And sparks, if fed correctly, can become wildfires. Building Route Nova didn't feel like a decisive leap, it felt like a series of tiny choices, each one made late at night when the rest of the world was asleep. But the moment everything shifted happened in a classroom no bigger than a storage closet, where a retired supply chain professor named Dr. Whitaker taught an advanced logistics elective at the community college. He was the kind of man whose brain never stopped moving, whose eyes lit up at inefficiency the way other people lit up at fireworks. I stayed after class one evening to show him a question I had about routing algorithms, and somehow ended up showing him my massive spreadsheet. He didn't speak for a full minute. He just scrolled and scrolled and scrolled tabs, macros, heat maps, forecasting models. Finally, he looked up at me with this expression I'll never forget, half disbelief, half exhilaration. "You built this? Just for fun?" I said, suddenly embarrassed. "This isn't fun," he replied. "This is infrastructure." Over the next few weeks, he stayed late after classes, helping me convert crude Excel formulas into actual code. He taught me how to build an engine, not a spreadsheet. And one night, he said the words that would change everything. "Ava, you don't have a project. You have a company." He introduced me to one of his former students, an early-stage angel investor, and the 3 of us began forming Route Nova from the bones of my data. We registered the company under a holding LLC with a generic name, one that had no ties to me or my family. I insisted on it. I wanted anonymity, safety, freedom. By the time we built our first minimum viable product, I had spent nearly 8 months splitting my time between delivery shifts and coding. I was exhausted, but the kind of exhausted that makes you feel like your life is finally pointed somewhere. We convinced a handful of small restaurants to test our routing engine, promising them a system that would cut delivery time by 15–30% and reduce dependency on expensive third-party apps. It worked better than we expected. Much better. Within 6 months, word spread across the city's restaurant community. There was a mysterious routing tool, cheap, efficient, shockingly accurate, that could slash costs without sacrificing speed. It was as if someone had cracked the city open and rearranged its arteries. Orders were arriving hotter. Drivers were earning more. Customers complained less. Profit margins ticked up. And no one knew the founder's face. I kept it that way intentionally. I still lived in my small apartment. I still delivered pizzas for the mom and pop shop a few nights a week. I still showed up to family gatherings, smelling faintly of garlic and car air freshener. The world didn't need to know that the girl with the red insulated bag was quietly rewriting the logistics backbone of the city. And honestly, I liked staying close to the ground. Being a driver wasn't beneath me, it was my research. Whenever I picked up deliveries, I studied everything: bottlenecks, restaurants that needed process overhauls, neighborhoods underserved by current systems. Drivers talked freely around me. Customers complained openly. I learned more from those nights than from any boardroom. But every startup hits a stage where growth outpaces modest beginnings. Route Nova began getting attention from mid-sized restaurant chains across the state. And eventually, we needed real funding. Series B, then Series C. That's when Liam entered my world long before he knew my face. His firm had a reputation for being selective, especially when it came to logistics tech. He attended our early diligence meetings as one of the M&A legal partners evaluating our data assets, growth curve, and risk factors. In those rooms, I was a voice without a body. I joined calls with my camera off. I signed documents using my initials, A.N. Nguyen, or the even more ambiguous A.N. Tran, both names tied to me, but vague enough to be untraceable. If anyone at his firm tried Googling me, they would find nothing except a Shell LLC and a 3-sentence founder bio written intentionally vague. I instructed PR to never use photos, never disclose my background, never give interviews. They could highlight the mission, the technology, the customers, but not me. Liam reviewed hundreds of pages of financials, compliance reports, and predictive models built from the data I'd collected over thousands of delivery hours. He asked sharp questions. Challenging ones. Questions that told me he actually understood logistics not at street level like I did, but at financial scale. But he never knew the founder was the girl delivering pizzas 2 cities away. Then came the due diligence discovery that changed everything. As part of our expansion strategy, Route Nova began analyzing larger datasets across multiple restaurant chains. And buried in those numbers like a tumor hiding inside the CT scan of a dying body, we found Ethan's empire. The data revealed everything Ethan had tried to hide for years. Underpaid workers whose time cards didn't match logged hours. Overtime violations. Delivery drivers being misclassified to avoid benefits. Cash tips pocketed by managers. Tax inconsistencies across locations. Patterns of ghost shifts likely forged to inflate numbers for loans. It was all right there in the timestamps and transaction logs. Cold. Objective. Incontrovertible. My father had once feared losing his job for questioning Ethan's ethics. Now, the proof was sitting in front of me like a loaded weapon. I remember staring at the numbers for hours. Not with satisfaction, not with revenge, but with a strange, detached clarity. Ethan had built his empire the same way he built his identity: performative, inflated, and rotting on the inside. Route Nova's investors, including Liam's firm, were in the middle of negotiating a distressed asset deal involving several commercial properties, one of which Ethan leased for his flagship restaurant. The data we uncovered became leverage in those negotiations. Real leverage. I didn't frame it as revenge. I framed it as compliance necessity, risk mitigation, and safeguarding investor assets. But deep down, I knew what it really was: the first crack in Ethan's untouchable facade. Still, I didn't reveal myself. Not to Liam. Not to Ethan. Not to my family. I continued delivering pizzas. Continued showing up to gatherings smelling like cheese and rain. Continued letting them believe I was nothing. Because in my world, the world Route Nova was quietly building, power wasn't loud. Power didn't boast. Power didn't humiliate others to feel tall. Power watched. Power waited. Power chose its moment. And mine was coming soon. By the time Route Nova quietly embedded itself into the city's delivery ecosystem, Ethan still had no idea he was feeding data directly into the hands of the niece he'd spent years belittling. A few of his restaurants had begun testing the platform through a third-party integration service. Some consultant had recommended it as a low-cost efficiency booster. Ethan, of course, took full credit. At his country club lunches, he bragged, "I squeezed the delivery fees down to nothing. These tech kids? They don't know what hit them. I always stay one step ahead." And crossed in Taka. He had no idea that the tech kids were in fact one tech kid, the girl whose business aptitude he once claimed could be learned by mopping floors. He had no idea that every delivery, every driver complaint, every late-night order routed from his kitchens flowed into Rootnova's servers, becoming lines of data I could read like a diary. His empire whispered its secrets to me long before he ever would. Meanwhile, Chloe's life marched forward in the spotlight as predictably as a scripted show. Her engagement to Liam became the family's favorite bragging point, Ethan walking around saying things like, "My daughter? She's marrying a partner at one of the biggest investment firms in the region. We don't settle in this family." The engagement party was pitched as some kind of high society milestone, the sort of event meant to cement Ethan's image as a self-made millionaire whose daughter was ascending into even loftier circles. The irony, of course, was staggering. The same firm where Liam was partner happened to be the lead investor in Rootnova's expansion deal and the distressed asset acquisition involving one of Ethan's largest commercial leases. Chloe's future husband was knee-deep in meetings evaluating her father's financial vulnerabilities, meetings where I, the girl in the red insulated jacket, was quietly one of the most influential voices on the call. But none of them knew that, not yet. The invitation to the engagement party arrived late, sealed in an envelope that bore my aunt's handwriting, not Ethan's. It felt obligatory, a formality, something sent because someone in the family whispered, "Well, we should invite Ava. It would look bad if we didn't." My mother placed it on the kitchen table with a hesitant smile. "You should go," she said gently. "Smile. Be kind. And please, don't talk about your little app. You know how your uncle is. No need to provoke anything." And Fortless and Fairmity, little app, if only she knew. But she didn't, and I didn't blame her. My parents lived in a world where success looked like Ethan. Loud, showy, performative. Anything quiet or unconventional made them nervous. When I tried to explain that Rootnova was scaling, that investors were circling, that small restaurants were thriving because of something I built, I saw their eyes glaze with confusion. My accomplishments were invisible to them because they didn't come with marble countertops or magazine features. Deep down, part of me wanted to throw the invitation away. Burn it, ignore it forever. I didn't want to stand in a room full of people who had already written my life story for me. I didn't want to see Chloe parade her curated perfection. And I definitely didn't want to hear Ethan's laugh as he pointed out every way I fell short of his idea of success. But there was another part of me, smaller, sharper, made of curiosity and something like defiance. Liam, would he recognize my voice? Would he connect the founder who strategized multi-city logistics with the woman standing in front of him carrying a pizza box? Would he see through the anonymity I had built as armor? I'd sat silently on calls with him, answering his questions in a clipped, professional tone, never revealing more than necessary. He probably assumed I was some seasoned executive, maybe in my 40s, maybe with an MBA. Someone who lived in a townhouse with polished floors and an assistant who scheduled my days. Not someone who parallel parked outside low-income apartment complexes at midnight with a stack of pizzas in the passenger seat. The idea of him seeing me like that, the version the family believed was all I'd ever become, gnawed at me, but it also intrigued me. Because the truth was, his recognition or lack of it didn't define me anymore. And maybe, for the first time, I wanted to see how the worlds I'd kept so carefully separated would react when they collided. So, after days of going back and forth reading the invitation, setting it down, picking it back up, I made a decision that felt strangely liberating. I would go. Not as the founder of Rootnova. Not as the hidden architect of Ethan's impending downfall. But as Ava. The girl they expected. The delivery driver in the simple dress with the scuffed shoes and tired eyes. I would drive my old car. I would walk through those sculpted hedges, past the luxury cars filling the driveway, carrying whatever version of myself they had chosen to believe in. If they underestimated me again, so be it. If they mocked me again, so be it. If Ethan tried to humiliate me again, so be it. Because this time, I wasn't the powerless girl in a red delivery shirt. I was the silent force holding his business model and his reputation by a single thread of data only I could see. And if the thread snapped? Well, he taught me a long time ago that some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Ethan's mansion always looked imposing from the outside, but on the night of the engagement party, It felt like walking into a curated fantasy, one designed to prove to the world that he had built something grand, something enviable, something flawless. The Hedgeline driveway was filled with luxury cars, Teslas, BMWs, a bright red Porsche that gleamed under the string lights woven through the trees. Inside, the foyer opened into a ballroom-like space where crystal chandeliers dripped light onto perfectly arranged banquet tables covered in cream linens and gold-rimmed glassware. Every wall seemed to hold a framed moment from Chloe's life: baby photos, ballet recitals, her first equestrian competition, graduation portraits from schools that cost more per semester than my parents made in a year. In the corner, a projector cycled through a slideshow of her journey, European vacations, charity events, posed candidates, high school awards, her and Ethan laughing together at business dinners. It looked less like a family celebration and more like a personal PR campaign. The guests matched the setting: polished, wealthy, self-assured. Neighbors from the gated community. Investors Ethan wanted to impress, business partners eager to cement relationships, extended relatives who all seemed to speak in compliments tinged with competition. And then I stepped in. I had barely crossed the threshold when one of the servers approached me with a clipboard. "Excuse me, you're with catering, right? The appetizers need to go out in waves every 5 minutes." I blinked. "I'm actually here as a guest." He flushed, muttered a quick apology, then hurried off, but the sting lingered. Not because I cared what one server thought, but because it was so unsurprising. I blended in perfectly with the staff, not because of my clothes, but because of the way I carried myself. Quiet, purposeful, invisible. As I walked further inside, I heard the whispers start. "She really came straight from delivering pizzas? I thought that was a joke. Does not common in taxi. Didn't she drop out of school? Bless her heart, she tries." I kept my eyes forward, my posture steady, my breath even. Years of practice. Ethan spotted me just as he was making his rounds, a glass of wine in hand, Liam standing politely beside him. The moment Ethan's gaze landed on me, a familiar smirk split across his face, the kind of smirk that always meant a performance was coming. He draped an arm around Liam's shoulder and raised his voice louder than necessary. "Our future son-in-law manages hundreds of millions," he declared proudly. Meanwhile, some people in the family still think minimum wage is a personality. A few guests chuckled. Others exchanged awkward glances. But most smiled the way people do when they want to stay in the good graces of someone wealthy. Liam didn't laugh. He simply nodded stiffly, eyes scanning the room, polite but distant. Before I could slip away, Chloe glided over, her designer dress shimmering under the chandelier. She looked immaculate, she always did, and she tilted her head in that sweet yet condescending way she had perfected. "Ava," she sang, stretching my name into a performance of kindness. "I didn't expect you to make it." I forced a small smile. The invitation arrived. "So I came." She twirled her champagne glass. "Well, we're glad you did. Though," she paused dramatically, as if deciding whether or not to say something truly scandalous. "Are you still, you know?" Her eyes dropped to the imaginary insulated bag she expected to see at my side. "Driving around with those little delivery bags?" There it was. The line delivered with a sugary tone but a razor-sharp edge. A few nearby guests leaned in, waiting for my reaction like it was part of the entertainment. I felt the old sting rise: humiliation, resentment, the ache of being underestimated, but I swallowed it with practiced grace. "I still work," I said simply. "Just like anyone else." She blinked, disappointed my answer didn't give her more to mock. Before anyone could respond, one of the catering staff slipped by carrying a large tray, and instinctively, I stepped out of the way into the hallway leading to the kitchen. The air smelled like roasted rosemary chicken and warm bread. I needed a breath of space, a moment to steady myself. Inside the catering kitchen, staff hurried around with trays, sauces, garnishes. I stepped aside, observing out of habit, until something caught my eye. A large cardboard box was taped to the wall, a routing schematic printed in color, annotated with arrows and times. The Route Nova logo sat neatly in the corner. My chest tightened. The restaurant catering the event was using my system. My routes. My algorithms. My hidden empire was operating right here inside Ethan's house. I stared at the map, equal parts stunned and amused. The head caterer shouted to a sous chef, "Make sure the deliveries between the prep kitchen and the serving stations follow the Route Nova map. We can't afford delays, this crowd complains about everything." I smothered a smile. Of course, Ethan didn't know. He wouldn't recognize that logo if it were tattooed on his face. But someone else recognized something. From the doorway, Liam lingered for a moment, his gaze drawn to the map on the wall. He stared at it with a faint furrow in his brow, the kind that appears when someone is trying to recall a memory. He lifted his phone, swiped through something, glanced at the map again. The lighting hit the schematic just right, illuminating the version number in the bottom corner, the same version he had reviewed in the due diligence packet weeks earlier. I watched him, keeping my expression neutral. He wasn't fully connecting the dots yet, but he felt the tug of familiarity. The worlds I had kept separated for years were circling closer, drifting toward inevitable collision. And somewhere deep inside, something cold and certain whispered to me, "This is the night everything changes." The moment happened the way avalanches do, quiet at first, almost harmless, until the weight of everything finally broke loose. Dinner had ended, and guests drifted toward the grand living room, where a small stage had been set up. Ethan loved stages, loved lights, loved attention. Tonight, he was in rare form, basking in admiration like it was oxygen. He tapped his glass with a fork, sending a sharp ring through the room. Conversations died down. Faces turned. The chandelier above us reflected in his wine like a spotlight crafted just for him. "Everyone," Ethan announced, voice booming. "Before we bring out dessert and toast to my daughter and her brilliant fiancé, I want to say a few words about work ethic." A few men in suits gave approving nods. Ethan always took any opportunity to deliver life lessons disguised as praise for himself. "You see," he continued, pacing slowly as if on a TED Talk stage, "success comes from choices. Smart choices. Hard choices." He paused dramatically. "Some of us chose to hustle. I rev or dies." People murmured in agreement. "And some of us." His eyes sharpened as they landed on me, standing near the edge of the room, half shielded by a potted plant. "Chose to drive pizzas around town." A polite wave of laughter spread, followed by the sharper kind snickers, smirks, pitying glances. Then he raised his glass toward me like a toast. "Still delivering pizzas, Ava?" It was exactly the same tone he'd used when I was 16 and missing my orientation. Exactly the same smirk. Exactly the same desire to publicly shrink me down so he could stand taller. The room waited hungry for my humiliation. I simply smiled. "Some deliveries," I said softly, "are more important than others." A few people frowned, unsure how to interpret that. Ethan snorted and waved a dismissive hand. "Cute," he said loudly. "Really cute." But his performance had an unintended audience. Liam had entered the room midway through the speech, still finishing a call. When he heard Ethan say my name, my full name, he froze mid-step. His attention snapped toward me like a thread pulled taut. He stared. Not with judgment. With recognition. Or, rather, the beginnings of recognition. I saw him mouth my name silently. "Ava Nguyen?" His brows furrowed. His hand slipped into his pocket for his phone. He stepped back into the shadows near the wall, away from Ethan's spotlight. Then, he typed something into Google. I knew exactly what. I felt it in my bones. A second later, the blue-white glow lit his face, and his expression drained of color. The headline was unmistakable. The reclusive founder behind Route Nova, the silent logistics empire powering America's restaurants. Below it, my name. My full name. My initials from the deal documents. My company valuation. My ownership stake. And one line in particular that punched the air out of everyone who eventually read it. Route Nova's distressed asset fund acquires multiple commercial properties, including the building leased by Ethan Nguyen's flagship restaurant. Liam read the article once, then again, then lowered the phone, like it weighed 10 pounds. I watched the realization bloom across his face, the memory of those closed-door meetings, the mysterious founder who negotiated aggressively for a specific compliance clause. My clause. The one that stated, if any restaurant chain under consideration is found engaging in wage theft or tax manipulation, the fund reserves the right to withdraw capital and call all outstanding loans immediately. Ethan's chain was the only one with red flags severe enough to trigger that clause. Liam swallowed hard. His jaw tightened. He looked at me not with arrogance, not with embarrassment, but with something like awe. He stepped forward through the crowd, weaving between guests, each footstep deliberate. The room slowly quieted as people sensed a shift, something electric, something off script. He stopped in front of me, voice low but steady. You're Ava Nguyen. A beat. From Root Nova. A gasp cut through the air behind him. Chloe blinked rapidly, confusion overtaking her practiced smile. Ethan barked a laugh. What, the delivery girl has a LinkedIn? But Liam didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. Instead, he turned his phone around, screen facing outward so Chloe, her mother, and the nearest cluster of relatives could see the headline. They leaned in. They read. Expressions shattered one by one. Shock. Disbelief. Panic. A cousin whispered, "No way." An aunt grabbed her husband's arm. Someone in the back muttered, "Root Nova? Isn't that the company?" Within seconds, a ripple spread like a shockwave. The room, once filled with smug laughter and background chatter, fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Ethan's smirk faltered, then collapsed entirely. "What is this?" he demanded, stepping forward. "Some kind of prank?" But his voice trembled. Just barely, but enough. My grandmother lifted her glasses, blinking rapidly, tears gathering in the corners as she whispered, "Ava, what is all this?" My mother pressed a hand to her chest, eyes darting between me and the glowing screen, her breath catching in her throat. And in that suspended moment, the laughter died, the whispers died, the performance died, and every person in the room finally saw me. Not the girl delivering pizzas. Not the cautionary tale. Not the background character in Chloe's golden spotlight. They saw the woman who held Ethan's financial fate by a thread. The woman who built an empire none of them noticed. The woman standing quietly beneath a chandelier that suddenly didn't feel so heavy. The shift was palpable. A dethroning in real time. The room had gone from mocking to breathless. And the night wasn't even close to over. The silence that settled over the room didn't feel passive, it felt charged, like the air seconds before a storm splits open. Ethan, who had never once been at a loss for words in his life, stood frozen for a breath too long, eyes ping-ponging between Liam's phone screen and my face, as if searching for a punchline. Finally, he forced out a laugh, brittle and high-pitched. "So, you started a little app," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Good for you, Ava. Entrepreneurship builds character." A few guests exhaled awkward chuckles, eager to restore the tone. But there was no going back. The room had already shifted. Everyone could feel it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't posture. I didn't match his theatrics. I simply said, "It's the little app that routes most of the deliveries in this city, including your restaurants." The words dropped like stones into water. Ethan's smile twitched. "What are you talking about?" But before I could answer, Liam stepped forward, shoulders squared, face pale but resolute. He knew he couldn't stay silent, not without burying himself alongside Ethan. Chloe watched him with wide, confused eyes, clutching her champagne glass like it was the only solid thing in the room. "Chloe," he said softly, "your cousin Ava is not just the founder of Root Nova. Her company is one of the core partners in a distressed asset deal my firm has been negotiating." "Thanks for watching." She blinked. "What deal?" Liam swallowed hard. "The deal involving your father's commercial properties." Murmurs rippled through the guests. Ethan stiffened. Liam continued, voice steadier now, as though ripping off a bandage. "Your father is one of the highest risk clients in the portfolio. There are multiple compliance flags. Wage issues. Tax discrepancies. Significant ones. The reports have been sitting on our desks for weeks." Chloe's jaw dropped. "Dad?" Ethan barked. "That's confidential information, Liam." Liam didn't flinch. It became relevant when Ava's name appeared on the screen. Slowly, almost unwillingly, every person in the room turned toward me. But we weren't done. Not even close. My phone buzzed in my hand, 3 vibrations in quick succession, routing center notifications. I didn't open them yet. Liam's phone buzzed too. He checked his screen and froze. "Oh God," he whispered. Chloe stepped closer. "What now?" He turned the screen toward Ethan, this time not me. "The closing docs were executed," Liam said. "Just now. Signed and recorded. The Distressed Asset Fund officially owns the mortgage on this property." There was a pause, a long, stunned silence, during which time might as well have stopped. Ethan's face drained of color so swiftly it looked like someone pulled the blood from his veins. "This property?" he echoed. Liam's voice was barely above a breath. "Your house, Ethan. Your flagship lease. Several of your restaurant locations. They're all under the fund now." "And who owns the fund?" a guest asked quietly. They already knew the answer. Liam didn't look at me when he said it. "Root Nova." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. A grandmother clutched her pearls. An investor excused himself and walked briskly toward the door. Someone whispered, "Jesus Christ." Chloe stared at her father as if seeing him clearly for the first time, without the glow of wealth, without the narrative of success he had so carefully curated. "You told everyone you were the strongest businessman in the family," she said softly, voice trembling. "You said Ava was irresponsible. You said she had nothing." Ethan staggered, reaching for the back of a chair. "This can't be right. This is some mistake, some bureaucratic glitch. Physician." But we all knew better. He looked at me, eyes wide and shining, not with anger, but with something he had never felt toward me before. Fear. Real fear. A fear so deep it finally stripped the arrogance from his posture. I met his gaze steadily. I didn't smirk. I didn't revel. I didn't deliver some triumphant monologue. I simply gave him the truth he had never once allowed himself to see. "You wanted to teach me what real business looks like," I said quietly. "Remember, Uncle Ethan?" He swallowed. Hard. "Consider tonight. A progress report." A few guests inhaled sharply. Others stepped away from Ethan, subtly distancing themselves from the fallout they could now smell in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Chloe looked as if her engagement ring had suddenly turned to ice around her finger. "Liam, you knew my father's businesses were in trouble?" Liam hesitated, but honesty was the only path left. "I knew there were risks. The worst of it, I only learned tonight." She stared at him, betrayed and bewildered. Across the room, my mother covered her mouth with trembling hands. My father's shoulders sagged as though he'd been carrying a weight for decades and someone had finally named it. And Ethan, once the loudest voice in any room, stood utterly silent. The mighty had fallen. And everyone knew it. But the night wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. Truth he had buried. Truth I had carried. Truth that now lay bare before every person who had ever laughed at the girl delivering pizzas. The hierarchy Ethan built crumbled in a single moment. And for the first time in my life, I stood taller than him without raising my voice at all. Months passed, and winter melted into a gray, uneasy spring, carrying with it the slow but inevitable unraveling of Ethan's empire. What had begun as whispers at the engagement parties soon cemented into headlines, audits, investigations. At first, local business blogs speculated. Then labor rights groups chimed in. And finally, the IRS stepped in with the kind of meticulous relentlessness that only a federal agency can bring. The news was everywhere. Labor violations found across popular restaurant chain. Employees claim wage theft, misreported hours. Threats of retaliation. IRS opens inquiry into financial irregularities. Cameras camped outside Ethan's flagship location. Former employees posted videos recounting long, unpaid hours and doctored time cards. One even mentioned a mysterious routing system that had exposed discrepancies in delivery logs. I read every article. Not for satisfaction, but for closure. A few restaurants survived, locations with honest managers, clean books, loyal staff. Others weren't so lucky. The ones run by Ethan's most aggressive protégés folded first. Then 2 more shut their doors within weeks, signs taped to their windows announcing temporary closures that everyone knew were permanent. Distressed assets indeed. Root Nova and Liam's firm made deliberate decisions. Save the jobs, not the ego. We purchased leases, rehired staff under better conditions, restructured failing branches. But Ethan? He was formally pushed off the board. Quietly, legally, irrevocably. His name, once plastered across storefronts, became a liability instead of an asset. My parents, who had always feared rocking the boat, now found themselves stunned by how quickly the boat sank. My mother was the first to call, her voice trembling. "Honey, your uncle is in trouble. Real trouble. They say he could lose everything. Maybe you can say something to your investors? To your company?" My father chimed in, trying to sound steady. "A letter of support. Or maybe clarify some mistake. You know, the whole family depends on his businesses." Mistake. There it was again. That word families use when accountability feels too heavy. "I can't interfere," I said gently. A day later, my grandmother called. Then an aunt. Then another relative I hadn't spoken to in years who suddenly addressed me as sweetheart. All with the same message in different flavors. "Help him. He's family. He didn't mean any harm. You owe it to him." But the most surprising message came from Ethan himself. An email. Longer than any communication he'd ever sent me. Polished, humble, desperate. Subject: misunderstandings and opportunity to collaborate. Body: Dear Ava, I believe there have been some misunderstandings regarding my intentions over the years. If anything I've said ever came across as harsh, I apologize. I always pushed you because I saw potential. Perhaps we could discuss a new partnership. I think together we could rebuild stronger than before. The email went on, paragraphs of self-justification wrapped in flattery. He used words I'd never heard him direct at me. Talented, visionary, impressive track record. It almost would have been funny if it weren't so predictable. I didn't reply immediately. I let the message sit for 2 days. Then I opened the rest of my inbox, my parents' panicked texts, my relatives' pleas, Ethan's follow-ups. And as I read them, memories sharpened with painful clarity. The nights I parked 3 blocks away in the rain because Chloe needed the front spot. The times Ethan publicly mocked me until my face burned. The Saturday I missed my orientation because he needed a delivery run. The look in his eyes when he believed I was nothing. But here's the truth. By the time I reached the bottom of the email chain, I realized I didn't feel anger anymore. Not really. Just clarity. The kind that arrives when illusions fall away and you finally see people as they're not as you once hoped they'd be. So I replied. Brief. Polite. Professional. My team follows the numbers. There's nothing I can do to change yours. No anger. No lecture. No dragged-out vengeance arc. Just truth. After all, for years he insisted numbers didn't lie. That success was earned, that merit was objective, that the market determined value. In the end, I simply let his own philosophy circle back to him. The way Root Nova circled every inefficiency in his empire. And nothing, no apology, no plea, no nostalgic appeal to family, could change the numbers that finally caught up with him. The summer sun stretched across the skyline in long, warm ribbons, turning the city into a mosaic of glass and motion. I sat in my new office, glass-walled, high-floored, overlooking the very streets I used to navigate with a stack of pizzas in the passenger seat. Below me, hundreds of delivery vehicles wove through the grid, moving efficiently, predictably, almost elegantly. Each one guided by the routing engine I had once built on an old laptop in a cramped apartment. The hum of the city was different now. Not louder, just clearer. For the first time, I could see the full shape of what Root Nova had become. Not a scrappy experiment, not a little app, but a living network that held together restaurants, drivers, small business owners, and countless communities who had been one unexpected disaster away from shutting their doors. My quarterly reports lay spread across my desk. Numbers and charts, metrics most people would find dull looked to me like stories. Proof. Validation. Entire rows of data showed small restaurants increasing profits, lowering costs, finally seeing a chance to grow without being crushed by fees or mishandled logistics. These places had survived not because of a man like Ethan, but because of a system built quietly by someone he once dismissed, someone he never thought would amount to anything. My phone buzzed. A new email. From Ethan. Again. But this one was different from the frantic chain of messages he'd sent months earlier. No paragraphs this time. No excuses. No shifting blame. Just a single line. I never realized how much you were paying attention. For a long moment, I just looked at it, feeling nothing sharp, nothing angry. Just finality. I moved the message into a folder I'd labeled closed, hovered over the delete key for a second, then decided against it. Some things deserved to stay archived not for sentiment, but for clarity. When I turned back toward the room, I heard the familiar rhythm of footsteps approaching. My team was gathering around the long oak table for our weekly meeting. Most of them weren't polished Ivy League grads or people climbing corporate ladders. They were former delivery drivers, line cooks, dishwashers, people who had once stood where I had stood, people who saw problems firsthand and understood the grit behind every dollar earned in the service industry. Jana, who used to deliver Thai food in the rain, now headed our dispatch optimization unit. Luis, once a prep cook juggling 2 jobs, had become one of our best data analysts. Marco, who barely spoke above a whisper when he first joined, now managed an entire regional onboarding team. They filed in smiling, carrying laptops, coffees, clipboards. They weren't just employees, they were the family I'd built. A family bound not by bloodline, but by respect, contribution, and shared purpose. Liam entered last, pushing the door open with his shoulder while adjusting his suit jacket. He looked different from the night of the engagement party, calmer, more grounded, as though he'd shed the last layers of a life that wasn't truly his. After the fallout with Ethan's deal, after the engagement collapsed within weeks, he'd made it clear he wanted nothing more to do with smoke and mirror legacies. "Ready for the new proposals?" he asked, placing a stack of documents on the table. "We structured the new partnership contracts, so employee protections are baked in. No loopholes. No shortcuts. No repeats of any of that." His eyes flicked to mine. We shared a small, private smile, the kind that acknowledged everything without needing a single word. Route Nova wasn't just fixing logistics anymore, it was rewriting the rules of how companies treated the people who kept them alive. As the meeting began, voices filled the room, ideas, concerns, laughter, debate. A room full of people who valued what I built not because it made money, but because it made a real difference. I sat back for a moment and let the scene wash over me. All my life, Ethan had claimed that blood-defined family. That loyalty meant obedience. That worth was measured in surface-level success and perceived power. But sitting there, watching the people who chose to stand with me not because of obligation, not because of fear, but because they believed in what we built together, I realized something with absolute clarity. Family isn't who shares your last name. Family is who shares your values. Family is who sees your worth even when you're invisible to everyone else. Family is who grows with you, not at your expense. My internal voice, the one that had been quiet for years, finally stepped forward with a truth that felt like laying down a burden I'd carried since childhood. My uncle wanted me to stay the girl delivering pizzas so he could feel big. Turns out, I kept delivering, just not to his table anymore. I closed my laptop, stood, and joined the team discussion. The world outside the glass walls buzzed with the movement of hundreds of routes I'd helped design, but for the first time, I didn't feel like I was running them alone. Before ending the day, I took one last look at the city, at the quiet empire built from late-night studying, long delivery routes, and the stubborn belief that being underestimated wasn't a life sentence. It was leverage, fuel, a starting point. And then, because I meant it with my whole chest, I turned to you. The one listening to this story, maybe feeling echoes of your own family wounds. And I say this: if you were ever treated like the delivery girl or the delivery boy in your own home, if your family only saw the uniform, the paycheck, the outer shell, drop your story in the comments. Here, we don't judge the job you had to work. We look at the person who kept going anyway, the person who became more, the person who deserved better. And if you want more stories where justice comes cold and clean, where the underestimated finally rise, make sure you subscribe and stick around. You're not alone here.